This podcast is brought to you by Free Buddhist Audio, the Dharma for your life. Our work is funded entirely by donations from our generous listeners. If you would like to help us keep this free, make a contribution at freebuddhistaudio.com/donate. Thank you, and happy listening.
I want to talk about how we explore insight through sadhana. I want to obviously use my own sadhana, Padmaloka sadhana, as a kind of primarily way in which I'm talking about it, but it's applicable to us all. But I thought I'd start with some stories. They're always nice, a little story. And as many of you know, I often tell stories about the girls. So I've got two little girls in my life, except they're not little. They're barely girls now. Alex has just had her 13th birthday and Ria has just had her 12th birthday. They've got to the rolling the eyes stage, where everything I do, they just roll their eyes. And I'm hoping we'll have a decent conversation when they're 35. Most of all, they just think I'm just, beyond the pale. Anyway, before I went on the 4-month course this time, I was talking to Alex and trying to explain why I was going and trying to actually find out how she felt about me going away for 4 months. And I said to her, "How do you feel about me going away for 4 months?" She said, "That is not a good question." And I said, "Why is that?" She said, "Because I'm supposed to, And she's quite right. She meant, you mean that I'm supposed to say I'm sorry that you're going away. And I said, "Oh no, I actually don't mean it like that. I do mean to know how if that's all right for you, me going away." And she said, "Actually, I do know why you're going away." She always says, "Actually." She said, "Actually, I do know why you're going away." And I said, "Why is that?" She said, "Peace of mind." I didn't know she had that phrase, peace of mind. But, rolling her eyes, peace of mind. And then I will say something more about that story in a minute. And then another time, Ria, this was about 2 years ago. I was looking after her for the day, and I was giving a talk at an open day at the LBC. So I said to her, "Do you want to come into the court with me, or just play outside and I'll get you afterwards?" She said, "No, I want to come in." I said, "Well, do you want to sit at the back whilst I'm giving it the talk, or at the front with me?" She said, "I want to sit at the front with you." She was doing colouring in a top model book. So she sat at the front with me, and I said, "I'll need to introduce you." "What do you want me to introduce you as?" She said, "You can introduce me as your half-daughter." So I said, "Okay." And then she said, "What are you giving a talk on?" I said, "Enlightenment." And she said, "That sounds boring." And I thought it does really, doesn't it? When I started the talk, there was a little boy in the front row who was about the same age as Ria. And I started the talk by saying that Ria had said, "That sounds boring." And the little boy went, "Yes." It's really funny. And suddenly, you think, God, it's so boring. But for me, those two little stories kind of do actually evoke something. So firstly, I think in many ways, Buddhism in the West is bedeviled by the idea of peace of mind. I think it's a trivial idea. And I think if you think of practicing the Dharma and attaining peace of mind primarily, you'll feel very disappointed with yourself and with the order and movement that you're a part of. Nothing against peace of mind, of course, and we need as much peace of mind as possible, but it's not something that we can aim at. It's something we have to keep on finding, but I don't think it's a goal, and I think it's a shame that it's attached itself to Buddhism, so particularly in the West, so vehemently, this idea of peace of mind, which mostly leads to a kind of quietism and a kind of actual self-indulgence. And that's why I think sometimes activist types can feel that Buddhists are just sort of trying to find peace of mind in a terrifying world that's falling apart, where we're just trying to find peace of mind. I think it's a real shame that Buddhism's got associated with peace of mind. I think the other idea that bedevils Western Buddhism is compassion, I'm afraid. Of course, nothing against compassion, but compassion is an enlightened emotion. so we don't know anything about it. It's the emotional equivalent of wisdom. Traditionally, it's wisdom and compassion are the light. It's the same difference as the light and the lamp from the light. No, sorry, the lamp and the light from the lamp. Yeah. So you can't have wisdom without compassion. So if you can't know about wisdom, you can't know about compassion, and they arise in the same moment. But I don't think compassion has affected Buddhism in the West like that. I think it's affected Buddhism in the West as making us at times overly compliant, with rather small beer of ethics, with a kind of basically a sentimental view of compassion, a softening, saccharine atmosphere that Buddhism has got affected by. I think those are two ideas that bedevil Western Buddhism is peace of mind and compassion. I'd much rather talk about a vision of truth, and I know that is the same thing as a vision of compassion, but it has a different kind of, it has some edge to it. A vision of compassion, you too easily think that you know what that means, which means sort of being a bit nicer and not swatting insects. Seems to get high up there, not flying and so on. And at the same time, so we all know that actually Buddhism is a movement towards enlightenment, and that's why I was giving a talk on enlightenment. But Ria's quite right; it does sound boring when you think of it like that. Oh, sorry, gotta watch can't decide. But it's such an abstraction, a huge abstraction. Of course, we don't know what we're talking about when we talk about enlightenment, or we only have hunches, glimpses. Now and then. What's interesting actually is that we sort of do know as well as absolutely don't. And I think Buddhism takes place in not knowing what enlightenment is and sort of knowing in some inchoate way. And we're trying to move from sort of knowing in an inchoate way to actually knowing. Anyway, I wasn't particularly going to talk about that, but as a abstraction, it is boring. It feels terribly technical. It feels huge and unattainable. All abstractions, I think, are unattainable. When people start talking about friendship, it feels unattainable. When it's you and me being friends, well, and enjoying each other's company, well, that seems all very doable. I remember somebody once saying to me, when are we going to become friends? Is it in this huge kind of abstract way that seemed different from him and I, if you see what I mean. I think abstractions are really problematic. You never live up to them. Happiness is another one, isn't it? I think you get yourself into a funny place if you think in terms of abstractions. Because they're universal and abstract, you never feel like you live up to them. So really the sadhana is that universal ideal of enlightenment toward which all genuinely Buddhist practice is a movement. It's that universal ideal, that highest good, made manifest, appearing to us in the form of one of the glorious figures around us, appearing particular, immediate, and in a sense personal. I mean, you can overdo the metaphor of personal with sadhana, but really they're beyond impersonal or personal, but in a sense personal, yeah. Certainly not abstract. If you can imagine a sadhana where you just turn over the word enlightenment, but what you get is of the figure, the yidam, the glorious yidam appearing to you, in Padmasambhava's case, looking directly at you, with eyes that seem, in one seminar, Bhante said he has black eyes. And somebody was very worried by that, and Bhante said, "Oh, you're thinking about the devil." Anyway, looking at you with those black eyes. I think the sadhana is we all know this, I'm not telling you anything you don't know. The sadhana is the ideal of our life, the highest possible good, the lodestar, the North Star, the alchemist's gold in front of us. We actually see the gold in front of us. It's not appearing in abstract form. And there's the incredible drama between you and the Yidam. Yeah. So I remember very clearly taking on my sadhana when I was 29. I was given just a few days before my birthday. I still feel very grateful to Padmaloka for going through the sadhana, because I took it at my private ordination and immediately thought I'd chosen the wrong one, because I've never liked images of Padmasambhava. I love Aloka's recent images of Padmasambhava, but the atmosphere around Padmasambhava, when I got involved, I actually found it a complete turn-off. I've never been attracted to Tibetan Buddhism, really. I mean, very superficially, but nothing more than that. And we used to have these Padmasambhava days where people dressed up, and people loved it. I found it an absolute turn-off. I couldn't, and I didn't like the images of Padmasambhava either. And when I took the sadhana, I thought, oh, what have I done that for? I thought I'd just make this awful mistake. And it was thanks to Padmaloka that he took me through it, and I carried on doing it ever since. But what struck me about taking on the sadhana was it felt like the first time that I'd meditated. I mean, I believed in the mindfulness of breathing and the Maitreyabandhu, and I'd done them assiduously every other day since pretty much my first day at the Wednesday class. It's funny, the teacher said, really you need to do these practices every day alternately, and I just started doing that. I mean, I was at art school, so I wasn't like massively stressed. I assumed that everybody would do that, because it was obviously sensible that you don't really need anyone to tell you that it'd be good to start your day with doing meditation, And I remember, I was 25 thinking, well, okay, I'll just do that every day. And I'd done it pretty much every day, not every day, but pretty much every day, the mindfulness of breathing and Maitreyabandhu. But it was only when I was giving the sadhana that I felt like, I want to do this. Maitreyabandhu, really, really good thing to do. Couldn't do it for toffee. Mindfulness of breathing, really, really important. That's the way to gain insight. Couldn't do it for toffee. But when I was given the sadhana, I really wanted to do that. I wanted to meet the Yidam. I felt it was the first time I was really meditating. It was like my whole life had come together in the sadhana in a way that I'm still trying to understand. I think when you're given a sadhana, you're given a heart practice. I think you're given the practice, which all your other practices are either entrances into or expressions of, if you see what I mean, either ways towards the Yidam or expressions of the Yidam. It connects, for instance, your name with the ideal. I mean, it's incredible the context that's given in your private ordination. So, because it's given in your private ordination, what you get in your private ordination, of course, is your name, and your name represents your particular living out of the spiritual life, so that when you're a Buddha, you will be fully your name. I'll be fully Maitreyabandhu when I'm a Buddha. Yanavaccha will be Yanavaccha, etc. The name represents, doesn't it, the intimate living out of our ordination vows. So it connects your name to your preceptor, your private preceptor, to your public preceptor, but also, of course, to Bhante, so very strongly, because that's his ordination that you're taking. You're not taking some broad-based Buddhist ordination, you're taking Bhante's ordination. So it connects you very much to him, and then you're given your sadhana. So it feels like in the private ordination, you're given everything you need to fully live the Dharma life. And you do that with the whole of yourself, with your heart, with your guts, with your mind. You're given the sadhana, you're given the Yidam. I remember very, very clearly I mean, in my private ordination, I was mostly just very nervous, but I remember Sivadra saying, and who have you decided to choose? And I said, Padmasambhava, I think. And he said, you think? And I said, yes, Padmasambhava. And so we did the mantra, and he said, Padmasambhava, this is, he introduced us. What I didn't realise is golly, what he introduced me to. And that's still opening up what Sivadra introduced me to in the stupa at Gukaloka 29 years ago. Yes, it connects me. It connects obviously with the name, with Bhante, and with the goal. I think it connects up your whole life. But of course, it also connects up with the first time you ever bowed to the shrine. You being given that sadhana is the consequence of that first time you bowed to the shrine. In a way, you started your sadhana when you bowed to the shrine for the first time. I remember very clearly my first puja on a weekend retreat 33 years ago, something, in Hemel Hempstead, which is now, anyway, it was very cold, mainly, thing about it. And I was really keen to do the meditation. Nobody had ever mentioned ritual, and I remember turning the lights down to do a threefold puja on the first night. Jayamati, who's now resigned, leading the puja, and that for me was the moment. And making an offering to the shrine, and I only made an offering to the shrine because I come from the West Midlands, and I'd paid for the retreat, which meant that I'd paid for that offering effectively, because they said, do make an offering if you want to. And I thought, well, I've paid for it. In the Midlands, that's an important consideration. If you go on holiday and there's a free trip, you have to go on the free trip because you paid for it effectively. Yeah. So I only, in my mind, only made the offering because I paid for that stick of incense. But that first puja was the beginning of the sadhana. It opened me up in a completely unexpected way to the mystery and beauty of enlightenment. I mean, I wouldn't have said that, and that sounds far too grand, but it's not far too grand. It did open me up to the mystery and beauty of enlightenment, to the ideal, to the beauty of the ideal, to the sacredness of the ideal. I remember, I don't know how many years ago, I initiated a carers project at the LBC, so I can't remember whether you were on that retreat, Vidyadhaka, I think you were, yeah. We did these first carers retreats, and people who are prepared to care for their relatives in very, very difficult conditions, golly. Some of them hadn't had days away from that for years. I remember somebody, this was the first time they'd had a break for 10 years. And we did this carers retreat, and we all went up and made the beds for them. We did this whole retreat, and I don't remember actually very much about it. I remember one man who spent the whole time outside smoking, and at the end said it was a great retreat. He'd got an awful lot out of it, but he just stood outside and smoked. And one of the things that was striking about it is we didn't do ritual. Obviously, we didn't do the morning ritual, and we didn't do puja in the evening. And what really struck me is what a huge difference it made to everything we did. It was like that penumbra of the sacred, which for me is the whole point of the Dharma life. We just kind of dispensed with that. And what we had was these itsy-bitsy practices, all of which I believed in. We're talking about how to work with stress, working with mindfulness, all these things that have since become much, much bigger. That was quite early days in the whole mindfulness explosion. But without the penumbra of the sacred, without the beauty, without the beyondness of the yidam, and that yidam I mean in simply bowing to the shrine. Without that, we were just reduced to, worthwhile but uninspiring bits and bobs. It was really striking. The reason it struck me so much is because it's not that I'm particularly into those things. When we do the Triratna, I know what I'm supposed to be doing. I reflect on everything. I never do. I just bumble through it, just as probably many of you do most of the time. Bumble through it. It can sometimes feel a bit long. And then, the sevenfold puja. I very rarely have strong moments. Actually, last night it was lovely. Vajra, I thought led it beautifully. But not very often I feel very moved by it consciously. It's just like what you do before you go to bed. But take them away, and you reduce everything into these kind of sort of well-meaning bits and bobs. It was quite strange because you can imagine if you're not, I would describe myself as somebody who's not particularly moved by ritual. I really value it and think we should always do it. But I don't emotionally feel it particularly strongly, and yet you take it away, and I don't know what we've got left. We've just got some handy hints. And you can get those anywhere now, you can get them online. You don't need to go out of your bedroom, So I was struck by that, and I think that any approach to the goal without the yidam, and caveat, I know lots of people don't find sadhana easy and so on. I think that's to do with a misunderstanding about what we mean by it, but anyway. But any approach to insight, to enlightenment, never mind insight, but to enlightenment, without the yidam, I don't know what that could be. I think you just end up with sort of handy hints. And those handy hints weirdly can be about insight, which is very odd. It's very odd that we've managed to make insight itself into a secular matter, that there's only a few, you just need to tick a certain amount of things sometimes. I know not all language about sadhana is as silly as that, but some of it is, I was talking to my friend about the 10 fetters, and I said, doesn't it give you pause for thought that there's 10? Isn't it weird that reality has come up with 10 handy things? Why not 11 and a half? Why not 17 and 3/4? Isn't it odd that reality is so concerned that we can remember it? It's come up with 10 or 3. Doesn't that give you pause for thought? Anyway, there might be a very suggestive 10 if you take them in the right spirit. But reality isn't providing us with 10 handy things that we can bend or break, for heaven's sake. Anyway, let's not go there. But I think approaches to insight without the yidam are almost bound to be heady and technical to some degree or another. But kind of more concernedly, they seem to be hard-hearted. I think once you lose the yidam, I think my instinct, and I can't argue this really, my instinct is that you lose that vital connection between your name, the intimacy of your name, the first time you bowed to a shrine, your friendships and community, and especially as embodied by the private preceptor, you're looking up to your precious teacher and holding him above your head, all the way up to the Buddha himself. If you take out the sadhana, I think we're doing something we don't understand. I put in my notes, you take away the mythic depths, but I'm not very keen on the language of myth. I think even that gets sort of trivialized. You take away something of such importance that you're left with a kind of hard-heartedness. I think that's one of the great issues for us all is hard-heartedness. I keep going back to that phrase in King Lear where Lear says, "Is there a cause in nature for these hard hearts?" And of course, if you're not careful, we misinterpret that and think that we need to be soft-hearted. What we need to be is open-hearted in the most radical way, but we actually need to be hard-headed. What we often end up being is soft-headed and rather hard-hearted, I think. But without the yidam and that connection with all of those, it's sort of the yidam, it's like the figure sort of animates the mythic connections of our life, something, except for none of that language is very good. So the yidam connects us, or the ordination, with our name, with Bhante, and with the goal. And it connects us with the living out of that day to day, living out of that drama day to day. It stops the movement towards enlightenment being boring. It connects the living out of that day to day. And of course it's easy enough to for sadhana itself to become, not sadhana. It's easy for it to be rough magic, as Yogi Chen says, which I take to mean mere image worship, mere evoking the image, disconnected from life, from the living out of the image, disconnected from life, disconnected actually from spiritual death, which I think is a bit of a problem in how we've presented sadhana. It can look like we've done integration, positive emotion, and spiritual rebirth. We've got the 6 element practice, but many people don't do it. I've never taken to it. I've actually a bit more taken to it now, but in my day, the suggestion was don't do the 6 element practices unless you're a really positive state of mind. If you're as self-critical as I am, you're never in a positive state of mind enough to do it, apart from on solitary retreats, and then you only do one of those once a year. So I think that's been a problem. It looks like we've taught integration, positive emotion, and then spiritual rebirth in a very refined way that then, surprise, surprise, doesn't feel like it works very much. So it's not surprising that there's an understandable, a real critique of sadhana, all of which I would put under that term of rough magic, a missing out, a bypassing of spiritual death to do a bit of image worship. And of course the other great danger of sadhana is sentimental fantasy, where it becomes like your star sign. You don't get this quite so much as you used to, but you used to. People would ask you, what's your sadhana? Oh, I see, yes. A bit like saying, oh, I'm a Gemini, But probably the main danger of sadhana is, sort of this sense of rough magic, mere image worship, disconnected from life and disconnected from spiritual death. But the yidam is, one way I think of it, I've been thinking about the yidam now, is that 2 ways, the same kind of metaphor is, one is the alchemist gold, that you're trying to turn the lead and dross and dreck and dirt of your life into the alchemist gold. And the other is that the sadhana represents the North Star, or the star that you plot your course by, your life's course by. Vidyadevi was looking up the meaning of alchemist, and I think it was Francis Bacon was saying, of course it's impossible to turn lead into gold, but in that trying to do something impossible, all kinds of new things happen that you would never have discovered had you not tried to do something impossible. That it's the very impossibility of turning lead into gold that is its real value. For a start off, it motivates you. If you said, let's turn lead into something a bit nicer, that you wouldn't be motivated. You need gold to be motivated. And secondly, by trying to do the impossible, turning lead into gold, actually you discover that you can do all kinds of things that you'd never thought were possible. I think anything of value is probably impossible, or it feels impossible. If you've ever done a watercolour, if you look at Cotman's watercolours, for instance, where he's left the little tiny shape of the gable end of a building in white paper, and it shows as that how the sunlight hits the white wall and shines very brightly, and he's orchestrated the whole tiny watercolour around one piece of bare paper. That's like impossible to do, and yet he does incredibly with that. Anything of value you experience as being impossible, like turning lead into gold, and that's what motivates you to try and do it. It also means that you're bound to fail in doing it, but because you're so motivated in doing it, you want to do it again. I remember when I started doing watercolours, it was an absolute mess, absolute rubbish, and I thought, okay, again, let's try again. It's just so much the case. Friendship, real friendship, is impossible. Love is impossible. And it's the gold. But without that gold, you wouldn't discover all the things you try to do. and it's the star that we plot our course by. Without that, we don't know what to do with life. I think that's why getting my sadhana was such an important experience in my life, is it gave me a lived out way of knowing what my highest ideal was, that I could bring to mind every morning. Here's my life's purpose. Here's my highest ideal. And it connected everything up to me. Of course, the star, to think of it as a star that you plait your course by, you have to remember it's somehow reflected in you, don't you? That there's a star reflected in you as well, in the depth of your heart. But it's an interesting metaphor, the star, because as soon as you move towards the star, you very often seem to lose sight of it. And that's intrinsic to that metaphor. You very often lose sight of it. Not only do you often lose sight of the star, but it seems to change where it is. Because when you move into a new terrain, so the star is in a different place. And so the star is in a different place. You lose either that or you lose sight of it, at least for periods of time. But it will appear to be in a different place because you're in a different place. But also you have changed in the movement. As you've moved towards that star in your life, you've changed. So what you thought was a star changes as well. So for me, for instance, I think it was about 7 years or perhaps 10 years after I took up my sadhana. I stopped doing my sadhana for quite a long period of time. Don't know how long. Feels a long period of time. I'd been doing it really religiously, and looking back on it too literally. You know, even though it's a very simple sadhana, you've just done the sadhana. I'd go through all. Then he carries a Khatvanga, and it's got the freshly severed head, the rotting head, the skull, and I'd try and see everything, because that's what I was taught. That you try and first of all really get a clear sense of the eidetic image. Once you really establish that, you can let go of that. But of course, because I've got a very highly critical nature, I was never satisfied with my eidetic image, so I'd keep on trying to get that. And then 7 years down the line, every bit of, this is probably a post hoc exaggeration, but every bit of feeling about the figure I'd kind of killed by an over-literal approach, So I stopped doing the sadhana, and I did just so-called just sitting or pure awareness for quite a long time. And really that came out of a sense I wasn't getting anywhere with the sadhana. So anything that was about trying to get anywhere, I didn't want to do anymore. I felt sort of slightly disgusted by it. I felt I'd been squeezing something, which is what I'd been doing. It's just that I'd taken it up wrongly. I'd taken up the journey wrongly. If you were following a star, I'd been trying to stare at the star all the time, and then I'd been missing my footing and so on. So yes, one of the things that can happen is if you do the practice to any sadhana too literally, you sort of squeeze anything you squeeze yourself too tightly. You don't understand what you're trying to do enough, and therefore you stop doing it. I think a lot of people stop doing sadhana for that kind of reason. Or you stop doing it because it really does just feel like rough magic and all a bit clunky magic, and the magic doesn't work anyway. So let's just stop, yeah? The other thing, of course, that happens is that when you move towards the star, the star seems to change its location, and you feel like, hang on, I thought I'd understood it, I'd got it, and then now it's not there. And if I try and put it there, it doesn't work. So sometimes I'd try and go back on a solitary to doing the sadhana, and I found it made me just feel tense. It just wasn't there anymore. It was like I was now staring into a patch of sky to see the star, and it wasn't there, and I was trying to make it be there. So when you go on the journey of your life, the quest of your life, and every human life is a quest, whether you like it or not, I think. That's what's been striking to me more and more, is it's not a question of taking up a quest, but your life is a quest, whether you like it or not, and your choice is to voluntarily live out that quest or not. If you don't live it out voluntarily, it'll be forced upon you. I mean, it's going to be forced upon you anyway, in old age, sickness and death. But life is forcing you to live the quest, and you have to cooperate with life. That's my sense of it now. It used to be that I thought I'd taken up a quest, and how come I had to take it up when other people didn't seem to feel that? I don't feel that so much now. I think if you look at anyone's life, you can see it's clearly a parabolic quest. It's a parable, and if you don't voluntarily live out your parable of your life kind of eats you up. Your life gets destructive. But when you start to live out that quest voluntarily with the guiding star of your yidam, the yidam seems to move, it seems to change, you change, the terrain changes. And yes, sometimes it seems to disappear, and I've had periods of that, like, particularly when things are difficult in your life. Golly, the sadhana really can feel like rough magic. It can feel like just stuff and nonsense. And I had quite a long period where I did feel that. I remember one time, for instance, Gary, who's my partner, for want of a better word, and there's a long story there. He was beaten up very, very badly one night and sort of tortured. He'd been coming back. We'd done this event. It was a fundraising event for Vajrasana when we first bought Vajrasana. We had this meal. I think you were there. We had this lovely evening. I think you were there, Suraj. We had this lovely evening. We were living in a community together above what's now the larder. We had this beautiful evening, didn't we? And do you remember Suketu was sang? It was very beautiful. It's such a shame when people resign, isn't it? Sort of thing. No, you need to carry on this difficult quest. But anyway, Ratna Ghosha did this lovely talk, and it was to try and raise money for the original Vajrasana. Anyway, Gary came unusually, unheard ofly, and then on the way back, he was grabbed from the street and put in the bottom of a stairwell with a plastic bag over his eyes, and they were taking his card and getting money from him and torturing him basically, all through the night. And the next day I was leading Padmasambhava Day. No, I wasn't. I think I was. Or no, I was leading Wesak. I was leading Wesak, and I got a phone call at 7:00 in the morning. I remember Maitreyabandhu coming in saying, "It's Gary on the phone." This is before you had mobiles. It's Gary on the phone. I think that is very unusual. Him ringing me at before 7:00 in the morning, and he was in tears, saying he's just been tortured all night. He'd just come out of the police station. I was due to go down and lead Wesak. And I said, "Oh, well, I'll come straight away." And he said, "Oh, no, I'm going to go to bed now. Come later on." So I then went down, and I remember it very clearly because I was leading. In my mind, I was leading a sadhana. I can't see how I was, but anyway, I went downstairs to lead the order meditation at the start of the festival. I think it was at 9:00, and I just heard this awful, terrible news, and then I just think, okay, the red lotus. And I thought, what am I doing? What am I doing leading this day at the London Buddhist Centre? Whatever do I think I'm doing? And then picturing a wretched red lotus where someone very dear to me has just been tortured. What do I think I'm doing? And sometimes when you say questions like that and you actually mean it and you're not just moaning, and I've spent a lot of life moaning, I got an answer straight away. I didn't even know I was really answering the question. But Padmasambhava said to me, it has to be transcendental. It has to be transcendent. It has to be that because of the nature of suffering. I mean, the meaning of life, as Bhante says, is found only beyond life. It has to be transcendent. Immediately that was the answer. That the lotus has to be transcendental. But that was a remarkable kind of moment of the yidam, stepping directly into the midst of suffering. But I've definitely, like us all, had periods of loss of faith. I've had periods in my order life where I've really struggled, and where I still struggle, presumably like you do. I seem to be rather given to struggling. Where it's very easy to lose faith in the yidam, in the goal, in the whole quest. I particularly find it easy to lose faith in the order that I joined. I've even at times lost faith in my name. When we do that, when we lose faith, and we all have periods of it, most of us do, sometimes those periods are really quite prolonged, sometimes usually for me, because of I'm surrounded by such good friends, they've never taken me too far away, although they've taken me away. But in my experiences of that, I lose, it's a disavowal of the mythic quest that I'm on, really. And then I say it's because the order's rubbish, or the movement's rubbish, or I get very critical of the college that I've become part of, or I'm very critical of myself. I'm very, very critically minded, as those of you who know me know. But really what I'm trying to do is disavow the quest with Padmasambhava as the goal of the quest. And in those moments, so much seems a fantasy. That the yidam feels like a fantasy. Our order can feel like a fantasy. Sometimes how we talk to each other about the dharma seems to me like a fantasy. Our discussions of insight feels like a fantasy. And of course the reason of that is because a lot of it is a fantasy. A lot of it is a fantasy. Of course it is. What else is it going to be? A lot of my sense of Padmasambhava is a fantasy. A lot of my sense of my own progress on the path is a fantasy. It's bound to be. Absolutely bound to be. I think it was Jung who said that the fool is the precursor to the prophet. In other words, to be a prophet you have to be a fool. You have to feel a fool. In other words, to learn anything you have to feel that you don't know stuff. And the quest of the Dharma life is always that, trying to become the yidam, for heaven's sake, and learning that you're not the yidam, and feeling a fool, and feeling that you've been living on a fantasy. Of course it is. The fool is the precursor to the prophet. So that as you follow the star of the yidam, you change, the terrain of your life changes. You don't know what's going to happen when the terrain of your life changes. When you're very ill, for instance, when your partner leaves you, when friends that you've relied upon and looked up to even leave the order. You don't know what the world looks like when the terrain changes. You don't know how that affects your vision of the goal. Yeah? So how I think of sadhana more and more is as the essence, as it were, of the whole of the spiral path, lived out through your life. That's what I want to think of sadhana now, not as, I visualize Padmasambhava and a various particular drama happens in the closed space of my meditation. And you see that space can become a fantasy, without doubt, and is bound to have quite a large elements of fantasy in it. Just as the gold has you're seeing the alchemist gold, and you're not fit to see that. That's just been like a skillful means to get you to find what is gold, but you're not fit to be finding gold. So you're bound to feel a fool. You're bound to fail. But I think of sadhana as that spiral path lived out in actuality. So today, just now, you sit down and you just try to jolly well calm down a bit. For me, just come back from the LBC. There's all sorts of, the LBC is doing wonderfully well, and it's full of very good people, and it's tricky. It's tricky. I've never been in so many meetings. Well, I have actually, but I'm in a lot of meetings. It's tricky. You know what it's like. It's tricky living this Dharma life. So then, after that tricky life, and then waking up the other night at 3 o'clock in the morning, worrying about something about the centre, which I then had a phone call just before I left that put my mind at rest to some degree. After that, I come down, I sit down on that cushion, and I try and calm down. You know, simple, isn't it? Simple. Calm down. Then you try to, as best as you can, cultivate samadhi. You know, like you did on your first time at a Buddhist centre, or the first time you meditated, or the first time you did headspace, if you're young enough. You try to basically move towards samadhi. And that's what you're always trying to do, isn't it? So there you are, you try and move towards samadhi. And if you're like me, and that's pretty hit and miss. If you're like Yanavajra, he just goes whoosh off into samadhi. I remember once Yanavajra said to me, I do start to experience what people mean by experience disappearing. You know, I can see that happens, and you know, it's interesting what that might mean. And I was nodding, saying, well, I've never had that. I just sit there and worry and try and calm down, and then try to move towards samadhi. It's a bit too modest, but anyway, there you go. On the basis of samadhi, on some degree of samadhi, you then try to see things as they really are. As I said, I've not personally found the 6-element practice. Apart from the 4-month courses, I very rarely do it. I think I learnt it badly, and sometimes it can feel like, you know, mountain bones. You know, okay, how did that? Nothing, not a thing. Okay, so puddle blood, you know. I was like, okay. I've never, as you can see, quite got it. That's mostly my fault, I'm sure, but I've never actually particularly taken to it. So what I've been mostly doing is reflecting on the lakshanas, and I have mostly been doing 2 of them, but I do 1 reflection on the lakshana a day, and then we know that the lakshanas are doorways into reality. They're not. The Buddha's not saying that reality is impermanent, insubstantial, and dukkha. He's not saying that. He's not saying anything about reality at all, because reality isn't a thing, therefore can't have anything said about it. You can't say there are 10 elements of it. You know, you can't say anything about reality at all. But the Buddha is saying, okay, so why don't you think in this insightful way? Why don't you take this kind of approach to your experience, and you'll find experience opens up in a way that feels like it's more real. And then if you keep opening, it'll feel like it opens up in a way that's quite difficult to talk about. So I take up one of those lakshana reflections, and I try thereby to start to open up my experience. At the moment I'm reflecting a lot on dukkha, as is perhaps obvious by the tone of my talk. I'm reflecting on dukkha, and then you know that all things are dukkha. So if you reflect that all things are dukkha, so there's dukkha in your experience just now, there isn't a place that isn't dukkha, so you can put down that constant pushing and pulling of trying to get nice things and trying to push away unpleasant things. You can put all of that down, because it's never going to work. You can never get an island of happiness with dukkha safely at bay. Even very, very pleasant things are going to end, because we already know the impermanence reflection. So it's not worth, you can't grasp that. That's dukkha as well. And then if you open up to that reflection more and more, your whole experience sort of opens up. It's very difficult to say what happens. You sort of, I suppose you'd have to say, you feel a bit freer. You feel a bit like you're not struggling so much. You're not pushing difficulty away and trying to grasp at pleasure, even grasping at the yidam. You're just, oh, it's a relief, oh gosh, I've got it wrong again, and it starts to open up. And that opening up opens up and becomes Shunyata itself. It's a doorway into how things really are, which you can never say. And that in our yidam becomes the blue sky of Shunyata. I personally find it much better to approach Shunyata through a lakshana rather than as an image. I'm not always convinced about the blue sky as an image. Sometimes I imagine a black night sky. I sometimes even wondered whether it comes from countries where you experience that a lot, where the blueness of the sky, it is a wonderful image for Shunyata because it's beautiful and blue, and that incredible blue that you get in Gukiloka, that incredible blue that you don't get in England. So it's got this presence almost. But sometimes I have Padmasambhava appear in a black night sky, which is infinite, because the metaphor of infinity is so central to it. Anyway, that's just me. But so then you, out of your spiritual death reflections, arises the greatly precious Guru. In the midst of, you've actually thought, okay, there is dukkha, and there's no way I'm going to pull this off. So I can let go of the whole trying to prefer one thing over another. I can let go of the whole picking up the bit I like and trying to get it so I keep it. Picking up the bit I don't like, trying to organize it so it can be put aside. I can give up on all of that and die into Shunyata, and then when I do that, the greatly precious Guru appears. So then you have the drama of the sadhana itself, and then you have the dedication for all beings, don't you? This is what I call the arc of sadhana. I got it originally, I think, from Karmashila, although it's gone through iterations in my own practice. Then you pray for the benefit of all beings, don't you? All of the sadhanas have a prayer at the end. That's the final part of the arc of sadhana, which of course is absolutely crucial to sadhana, but easily gets a bit routinized. And don't worry about that, Our pujas and the way we bow is easily routinized, but take it out and you reduce Buddhism to handy tips that you can get online. And a lot of people are getting them online. But I've been more and more struck by that prayer. I think that prayer is saying, okay, so I've lived out in my imagination the whole path. I've gone from, golly, I'm a mess, to calming down. I've gone from calming down to coursing in samadhi, through the dhyanas, soaked in integration of positive emotion. I've gone from that into turning my attention to the nature of things. I've died into the nature of things, and because of that, the goal of my life has appeared to me in ravishing form. I've done all of that now, and that's what I'm trying to do with my life. So please let me do that with my life. Please let me do that with my life. Because that's the start of my day, and then the day is, okay, let's test that out then. Let's test that out. Then you saw the yidam, he appeared to you, the lights poured down, the infinite blessings of the Buddha or Bodhisattva, the purification of the Bodhisattva, then eyes open and breakfast and work. I'm reading a book at the moment, and it's a whole book about one poem, and one of the points he says actually the thing that dominates our life is not sex or God, it's work. Most of the stuff, and he said, why isn't there more poems that talk about work? Because that's the big thing for most of us. There's breakfast, and then there's work, and then there's the day. I think what you're doing is you're praying to your yidam to say, please let this day be a little bit closer towards enlightenment than yesterday. Yeah? Please let this day be an expression of what I've just done now, thereby live out in reality, in the day-to-day matters of my life, what I've just lived out in the mythic depths of my experience. Please let it be expressed in this day. I've actually been more and more doing that. I've been saying to Padmasambhava, please protect me from my own bitterness. I've been feeling quite a bit of bitterness recently. Please protect me from self-pity. Please protect me from myself. Yeah. Please let me live it out in my day. Yeah. So you're trying to literally make each day a bit closer towards enlightenment than the day before. What else is there to do? And that's the living out of the sadhana. You live this day we're having now, try to make it more towards enlightenment, and then the next morning you're imagining it all again. Then, okay, that's been a mess, probably half a mess. You got that wrong. You didn't get to be mindful through breakfast, probably. You did slip into bitterness again. You did, but you've also tried, and then you do it again. You close your eyes again. You step into the whole myth of your life again. Live it out in its most beautiful form, and then you do it again. And that's what sadhana is. It's the whole spiral. Settling, samadhi, prajna, spiritual rebirth, life practice, living it out in day-to-day, every moment of your life, and then going back into the sadhana again and again. That's what sadhana is. And the order and the movement is the crucible that you live that out in. That's why Bhante created it's the sadhana lived out, the order and the movement. It's such a shame that more of us aren't more involved in the order and the movement day to day. I love the fact that I'm still teaching the newcomers. I was teaching newcomers to the Maitreyabandhu on Wednesday night for the umpteenth time. And I don't know about you when you teach it, but I just think I can't possibly, nowadays I'm just saying, I can't possibly teach you this meditation. I can't possibly teach you meditation. Let's just get you started. Here's some things to get going with, but I can't possibly teach you meditation. I'm still trying to learn Maitreyabandhu. It's not like I experience ongoingly unbounded love for all beings. I'm still learning that as well. I don't see where that can stop. So the order and the movement is the crucible in which you live out what you've just lived out in the sort of drama of the sadhana itself. You're trying to literally live out the goal in your life. You're trying to be more like Padmasambhava, in my case, in my life. You're trying to live out the myth of your yidam and the drama of your sadhana in your life. Now, you're not trying to do that literally, and sometimes in the past it did get rather literalized. So I frankly find it a bit silly where if you're doing the Padmasambhava, people suggest you wear red and so on. It's never really worked for me. It's been just a fantastical idea. But what I think I experienced, is that actually when you've been doing the sadhana for a few years and you've been doing it diligently and failing to do it and realizing that it's mixed up with a lot of fantasy and a lot of projection and a lot of silliness, and that's because you're a human being. That doesn't mean to say you're at fault in any way. It's just that you're human, and most of you are as a bit of a nightmare if you were to look at yourself honestly. Fair enough, no problem with that. What you find is that when you look at your life, golly, I have been trying to do that. I mean, Yanavacha is one of the great friends of my life. I've lived with Yanavacha for 25 years, something like that. And Yanavacha has got this wonderful shrine in his room, a lovely painting by Chintamani of Manjugoshin, and we'll be doing that sadhana tomorrow. And I've seen Yanavacha live out the myth of his sadhana in his life more and more. It's absolutely obvious to me. Obviously, Manjugosha connects with his name, the voice of wisdom. Sanghaji used to call it the sleepy voice of wisdom. But even Yanavacha's sleepiness is a bit not quite what you think. I've seen Yanavacha's voice of wisdom again and again and again in difficult meetings, in very difficult meetings, in very inspiring talks, in my many conversations with Yanavacha in his room. Again and again, I see a voice of wisdom. I see the sword. I see that incredible colour of Manjagosha, that colour of the lion's eye, which is I'm always struck by Manjagosha. It's not the only figure that's not a primary colour. What is that metaphor? It's a metaphor of subtlety, of a new kind of subtlety of wisdom, you know. And I've seen it in Yonavacha. I've known Yonavacha pretty much since the first time he came along, and I've just seen that grow daily, in his life. And in my own way, I took on the Padmasambhava practice almost against my own instincts. But golly, is it what I've been trying to do? Because Padmasambhava is associated with demons. That's the primary metaphor of Padmasambhava. And I've had a lot of demons in my life. I don't know why, really. When I look back, it's not been that bad, for heaven's sake. I had very loving parents, very stable upbringing. I've been blessed in my Dharma life with friends, but golly, I'm beset by demons. At least I feel myself to be. It's always rather an embarrassment, but and I've been trying to transform them. But I'm also very, very aware of the demons around us. I've been reflecting a lot on demons recently. I've been really struck by Padmasambhava's demon-slaying mudra. That's how it's usually put. But of course, Padmasambhava doesn't slay demons. He doesn't slay them, does he? And why doesn't he? Because you can't. Yeah? If you could slay demons, that would be the best thing to do. And you see that's what history has been, very often, is the creation of demons and the attempt to kill them all. From the National Socialism to whatever, has been the creation of demons and the attempt to kill demons. And what you do is you make them stronger. You can't kill demons. When you cut off the head of the Gorgon, it grows another two. The reason Padmasambhava doesn't slay them is because you can't slay them. And the reason you can't slay them is because they're in you, as much as anywhere else, and they're forces in culture. There's so many elements of that story that is so strong to me now. Padmasambhava pins them down. He has a purba, doesn't he, which is his tent peg, basically, and he pins down a demon, and he finds out their heart, doesn't he? Finds out the heart name. In other words, he finds out what the demon really is. And that internally is telling the truth about yourself, to yourself, and it's seeing the demon outside of you and pinning it down and looking at it. Like one of the things that you need to do when people start to act demonically is, well, you don't need to, you do it instinctively, is you stop talking and you look at them. And you look at them in a new way. When you're talking with friends, you don't look at them very much. When I talk with Yonavacha, when I talk with Parambandhu, when I talk with Vidyadhaka, when I talk with Pranyamanas, any of my friends, you don't sort of look at them unless you're going into difficult terrain, and then you look at them more. Normally it's more osmosis than that, isn't it? There's an exchange. You don't sort of eyeball each other. You don't, not quite, but when someone's suddenly very difficult, you stop and you look at them very carefully. And that's what Padmasambhava is doing with those eyes. He stops and he looks at you very carefully to find out what's going on. And golly, there are demons, aren't there, in our order. And when I say demons in our order, I don't mean people are demons, but demons seem to move through the order, sometimes hugely and dangerously. And how do you work with demons? You can't kill them. If you try and kill them, you make them stronger. What I've been wondering as well is if you give them too much attention, you make them stronger. What's then even weirder is if you give them too little attention, you make them stronger. It's a tricky business. You need Padmasambhava for demons. But don't think that they're not around. They're around all the time. They're in us and they're within us. One of the things that have been striking me very, very strongly is that, Bhante's talked about the order being a nucleus for a new society, which it is, and I experience that on a day-to-day basis, particularly with my close friends, a nucleus of a new society. But the order is also a microcosm of the old society. And those two things are always in tension. It's not just a microcosm of the old society, it's the old society It's the old society in a small jam jar called the order and the movement, and you see it horribly clearly, and it touches you much more. When it's just something you're going to say online, the old society is something you can, blow a raspberry at. When it's in a meeting, or when you're trying to help a centre grow, or when you're trying to teach, Bhante's vision, which is the most radical dharmic vision you can possibly get. When you're trying to do that, then you see, gosh, not only do you create the vision, a nucleus for a new society, what you're also doing is evoking the old society. And the old society is a dangerous place, and it's always there, and it's demonic. It's always been demonic. It's full of demonic forces that you need to find a way of. Interesting, Padmasambhava either turns them into protectors of the Dharma, or he neutralizes them, interestingly. So sometimes that's the best you can do, is that metaphor is saying. And isn't it interesting that in the legend as we got it, the parable as we got it, Santarachita starts it, doesn't he? He tries to build the monastery, and the demons pull it down at night. And I think that's Padmasambhava in an earlier guise. I think it's the same guy. Yeah, I think it's Padmasambhava before he's enlightened, that he, like us all, tries to build a place of meaning and value, and doesn't take into account the real forces in himself and around himself in society that need to be transformed, and the danger of those forces. And it's only when he learns that he becomes Padmasambhava. I think Santarachita is the same person. I think he's Padmasambhava before he becomes Padmasambhava. And I'm still learning, I'm still trying to live out that parabolic quest from being Santarachita, or trying to be him, because he's a very good man, to becoming Padmasambhava. That seems to be what my life has thrown at me, and I didn't want that, but that's what I've got. So I try to live that out in my life, the demons within myself, the demons outside myself. That's just what's been given. And then I try to live it out completely in the sadhana, and then I try to make the next day a bit more like my sadhana. And of course, in living sadhana like that, going through all of those stages in the meditation, then trying to live all of those stages out in your life, you're bound to get it wrong, you're bound to fail, you're bound to feel a fool, you're bound to feel that, golly, so much of it is fantasy. When it's hard times, so much of this whole thing that we're doing feels like a fantasy. And a lot of it is, if we're honest, a lot of it is, and it's bound to be, because we're fantasy kind of creatures. We must forgive ourselves for that fantasy, forgive each other, let fantasy be burned off, but find out of that burning the true gold, the true alchemist gold. That's how we do sadhana, is we live it out every day, we try and practice it, we get it wrong, we fail, we realise that a lot of our quest has been a fantasy, and we're honest with ourselves about that. We're honest about the fantasies that we've created around us. We let it burn ourselves away so that we die, so that you end up with the alchemist gold, so that you end up with Yidam himself.
We hope you enjoyed this week's podcast. Please help us keep this free. Make a contribution at freebuddhistaudio.com/donate. And thank you.